Anyways, today, I want to ask you a question to start, okay? What have you built so far in 2023? What have you built so far in 2023? Now, this might blow your mind, but did you know we're already 2/3 of the way through the year? So we're already 2/3 done, okay? And here we are fast approaching that last third of the year. And my question to you is what have you actually created this year, right? For us as a church, which all a church is a bunch of faith individuals who then what we do as individuals, we come together and we join our energies and push in the same direction. That's what a church is. We're never homogenous in every single belief we have. We never have exactly the same, ideas on faith, but we are as a bunch of individuals, and then we come together and we agree enough on Christ that we all push together in the same direction. And I always ask God, where does he want us as a church to be going in this next season? Because I actually think that's a really good thought for you to have. Faith isn't like a static, stationary thing. It's this journey that we're on. We're consistently following after Jesus. So it's important that we're always asking kind of God, what is the next thing that you're drawing us to? And at the end of 2021, we obviously had a really crazy scenario, 2020 and 2021, wild years in general, right? But we finished 2021, and for the first time ever, we actually got keys to our own property at the end of 2021. We had been a mobile church for over 10 years, and we got our first piece of real estate, and we're like, cool, we're going into this season where we're going to take and actually build out a building that's going to be actually created for our church instead of all these crazy spaces we've used for meetings, for alphas, for weekend services. And as we got into 2022, I told you, I wanted to make sure though, as we were going into this building project, we didn't get confused. I said, I need you to get this. We're not building a building. We're not building a building. We're building a legacy. The building is just a tool. It's a means to an end. It's not the end. The building is not the focus. The building is a tool that points towards the end that we're going to. And I said, what we're going towards is legacy. You see, legacy means living in a way that blesses beyond just your circle. Legacy means living in a way that outlives you. That someday, every single one of us, right, will cash out from this life and we will head on into eternity. And the question is, have we built anything that sticks around to bless the generations afterwards? Or did we send anything ahead that's actually affecting heaven? That's legacy. And I told you this is for us what we wanted to do. We talked about legacy all of 2022. And then when we got to the beginning of this year, as I was looking at that phrase, right, we're not building a building, we're building a legacy, God put my eyes on that word building. And what I was realizing is it's important for us to think about this in faith. We spent a whole year talking about legacy, but if I may, legacy's the destination. That's what we're going towards. And what God put my eyes on instead is building. You see, building is the action. Building is the action. Real quick, you're not going to get to legacy without hard work. You get that, right? It was that's great to talk all about the destination. I could talk all about the destination of a trip you're going to take and give you all the details. But sooner or later, you have to shift into well, how are we getting there? Are we flying? Are we driving? What are the hotel arrangements? How much is this going to cost? See, that's the building part of it. And what I felt like God was saying is 2023, what it's going to be about is it's going to be about figuring out how do we really get to a place of legacy? Great to talk about legacy, but how do we put this into practice? How do you really build something that's going to last? You see, when we talk about legacy, that's the noun, but when we talk about building, that's the verb. And I thought that's perfect because that's what we do as Christians very often. We try to shift the word faith into a noun, like it's something you have. Well, I have faith, it's a thing. And it's faith. Well, faith is a verb. Faith is something that causes action inside of you consistently. Faith changes how you move. It's about the work that you do. To build, by definition, is to form pieces into a whole or to develop according to a plan. And listen, if you want 2023, if you want the rest of your life to actually have legacy effect, you're going to have to consciously put some things together. You're going to have to consciously develop some things towards an end. And I actually love this verse. Paul talked about this idea that we kind of have this opportunity. If you're a Jesus follower, that's the foundation of Christ. But then you have the opportunity to build something on top of this. Check out this verse in 1 Corinthians 13, 9 through 15. He says, we are God's workers and you are God's field. You are God's building. Because of God's grace to me, I have laid the foundation like an expert builder. Now others are building on it, but whoever's building on this foundation must be very careful. For no one can lay any foundation other than the one we already have, Jesus Christ. He's like, let's be clear, the bedrock of your life as a Jesus follower, it's Christ alone. That's the foundation, okay? He says, anyone who builds on that foundation may use a variety of materials, gold, silver, jewels, wood, hay, or straw. But on the judgment day, and throughout the Bible, that's really clear, that's the day that this life ends and the eternal part of who we are moves on into heaven. He says, fire will reveal what kind of work each builder's done. The fire will show if a person's work has any value. If the work survives, the builder will receive a reward. He's like, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be an awesome day on that judgment day. But, he says in verse 15, if the work is burned up, the builder will suffer great loss. The builder will be saved. That's a great comment he makes there because he wants to make sure. Just remember, for you as Christians, you're not saved by what you build here on earth. You're saved by grace because of Jesus Christ. That's the only reason why you're going to get into heaven. But he says the builder will be saved, but like someone barely escaping through a wall of flames. What he says is this: all of you who are Jesus followers, you're then going to build stuff on top of that foundation of Christ with the rest of your years. That's why, honestly, one of the reasons that I'm really, really passionate about all that stuff we do with Acts Kids, why in our new building, the Acts Kids area has more space than our adult space by square footage. You know why? Because if those kids fall in love with Jesus, they have decades to build a life on top of it. And listen, it's no less for any of you who have come to Jesus later on. Man, God is faithful, but sometimes I've talked to people who get this straight when they're like in their 50s and they're like, man, I wish I would have known this when I was like 15. I could have built something so much more out of my life, and here I am now playing catch up. And he says, you get this opportunity to build a life on top of Christ. And he says, someday you're going to go to Judgment Day, and Jesus is going to look at your life, and he's going to say, what did you build? And he said, but here's the reality. There are going to be tons of people who are saved, who are going to heaven. But he says, it's going to be a really sad day. Because these eternal fires are going to come up, and they're going to kind of burn through your life. And he's going to say, well, you're saved, but you built nothing that lasts. Everything you built in your life was just temporary on earth. Everything you used your energies to, everything you used your time to, everything you used your finance to is just stuff and experiences and things here on earth. And I mean, you're saved, but there's really nothing to show. And he says, you'll be saved, but it'll kind of be like a sad moment where you're like, why did I do so much hard work and spend so much time, and here I am in eternity, and I've kind of got like nothing to show for it? And he says, then there are some that he says, you're going to get there, and the work is going to go through the fire, and there's still going to be these amazing things standing. Because he said, you figured out while you were on earth, instead of focusing all your time and energy and money on just stuff here and now, on things here and now, you started thinking, how can I do something that leaves a legacy beyond my life? How could I live in a way that outblesses me? How could I use what I have so that someday when I get to heaven, there are people there and they say the reason why I'm here is because of the work that you did while you were on earth. You see, that is what legacy is all about. So listen, we can use the rest of this year to build a ton of things. You can build anything this year. But I would say this, in 2023, are you going to build anything that lasts? Are you going to build anything that actually lasts? I don't know about you, but I want my life to leave a legacy. I want the amount of energy I've poured into this world not to be something that just disappears. I want it to be something that continues to stick around after I'm gone. And I told you there's a secret to this, a shortcut. For all of you who are wondering how you do it, I'll just give you the shortcut. Some of you have heard this before, but you need to remember it. The shortcut to making sure that you participate in something that builds legacy is very simple. You find something that God is doing and you join it. If you want a shortcut to immediately know that you're building something of legacy, it's really simple. Find somewhere you know God is moving, and then say, I'm going to join into it, because here's the deal that I know. God is all about legacy. He is not about quick, fast, a quick solution, a temporary solution. He is all about the long term of our life. Listen to me, friends. That's why some of you have had really, really bad years in your life. You're like, I don't get why God would let me go through this. God's like, I do, because I'm playing the long game of eternity in your life. This is an important season for you to go through, because actually, I'm not so concerned about you having a good year. I'm concerned about you having an eternity with me and having legacy. And listen, in Matthew, when he's talking to his disciples, Jesus just outright tells us, here's what he builds. Check this out. It's this cool interaction in Matthew 16, 13 through 18. It says, Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi. He asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? And that was Jesus' nickname for himself. Whenever you see Son of Man, that's what he called himself when he was here on earth. Well, they replied, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And then he asked them, well, who do you say I am? And Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, you are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You didn't learn this from any human being. And he says, now I say that you are Peter, which means rock, and upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. He says to Peter, let me tell you what I'm going to build. I'm going to build my church. My church is the people of faith that are going to grow from this little region in the middle of Israel. And it's going to spread out and go and go and go, and it's going to spread around the world. I'm going to build my church. And I love this. He says right away, it is legacy, because he even addresses it. He says, I will build my church. And his very next comment is, and the gates of hell won't be able to overtake it. You see, this is what's so great, friends. Let me tell you about the church, okay? The church of Jesus Christ that started 2,000 years ago, if you know the history of the church, even as days get insanely dark, and some of you in the last few years, you're like, okay, the whole thing is going down, right? It's all going down. You've already had that feeling. You're like, this whole American, it's all gonna, I see it circling the drain, right? I have really good news for you, okay? Christianity has survived terrible circumstances far worse than anything we have seen in our life. It has survived government oppression. It has survived plagues. It has survived all these horrible things. The church will not be extinguished. It might shrink and grow, but the flame of the church will never, ever be extinguished, because the people of God will continue to share the goodness of Jesus throughout. And he says it's the one thing. It's the one thing that's truly going to last. So listen to me. I said, if you want to build a legacy, find what Jesus is doing, find what God is doing, and join it. And I'm telling you, Jesus is building his church. So I said in 2023, what if in this year you just said, I want to add something to that legacy mindset? So what if I just focus this year on building his church? And actually what's funny about that is I said that on like the first weekend in January. I was like, this is what I think God's calling us to, action like never before, to be able to pour in and think, how can I build his church this year? How can I strengthen the church? How can I add to, the strength of his church in our community? How can I make sure that we continue to grow in influence, and that people in our community know there's a strong presence of Christians here, that when they're struggling in faith, they know there's a place for them to be a part of. And then what was wild, of course, is that a few months later, I had to come back and tell you, hey, interesting news, we don't have a home as of October 1st. And I was like, you know how I told you, like, this was the year that was going to be about taking action, moving forward, towards what God's calling is, and really sacrificing and giving what we can to be able to build something. And it was like, turns out God already knew what I didn't at the first weekend of January. He's like, no, it's literally this year. If you don't build, nothing's going to happen, right? And I told you, listen, we are shifting into this completely different season for our church, where I said, we as a church are coming together. And I said, this is a really strange moment where I'm asking all of you who call this your church, right, to be stepping into action, to see how you can serve, how you can give, how you can help build, so that we can make this a reality. And we don't have this big fall off where we have no location to meet and trying to figure out how to do this. And instead, we can continue to increase in influence. It was a call to action. I told you it reminded me of Nehemiah. It's an amazing story from the Old Testament. Nehemiah was a cupbearer for the king of Persia. They were in exile for 70 years, and now the people were coming back to their area of Israel. And it was this amazing moment where they were starting to rebuild the worship of God. And he found out that there weren't any walls around the city, that he's like, man, someone needs to do something about this. And you did great just a few weeks ago telling us about how we can implement some of the strategy that Nehemiah did, where how he built something that actually lasts. But he felt this call of like, I need to do something about it. And it's amazing because in Nehemiah 2, 17 through 18, it says this. He talks to these leaders and he says, I said to them, you know very well what trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace. And then I told them about how gracious the hand of God had been on me and about my conversations with the king. And they replied at once, yes, let's rebuild the wall. So they began the good work. A leader stood up and said, we have this opportunity to build something. And all of you have your own houses, all of you have your own businesses, all of you have your own stuff, but he said, there's this opportunity that if we join our hands together, we can build something that's not just going to bless us here and now. It's actually about legacy. It's going to bless the community of faith for years and years and years. Now, Nehemiah doesn't hide what it took. It wasn't just like this rah-rah, like he gave a speech and everyone's like, yeah, and then everyone went home. It was like, cool, we'll see if that happens. It says this in Nehemiah 4, 21 through 23. This is what it actually took. He says, we worked early and late, from sunrise to sunset. Half the men were always on guard, and I told everyone living outside the walls, stay in Jerusalem. That way they and their servants would help with the guard duty at night and work during the day. During this time, none of us, nor I, nor my relatives, nor my servants, nor the guards who were with me, even took off our clothes. We carried our weapons with us at all times, and even when we went for water. He said people had to start early and people had to stay late. And he said, in fact, I even told people who are far away, you need to change your travel plans so you can be here more often. I can't have you gone for long periods of time. He says, me personally and our leaders, he said, we just left our boots on. We never really got to take a break because we knew leadership was critical during this time. So we were there and we were leading throughout. We never got to kind of take that time off. And listen, since we talked about this 4 months ago, there are tons of people in our church who immediately felt this call, and this is what they shifted into. There are a ton of men and women in this church that they have literally worked every single Saturday for the last 4 months. They haven't taken one Saturday off. They've been there every single Saturday serving. We have people right now who work there every single Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, sometimes Friday, all day Saturday, show up and serve on Sunday. Go back to work on Monday. And listen to me, that is the picture of people who realize this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for legacy. Because that makes no sense in and of itself. It makes no sense for myself or other leaders to be like, this is the summer, actually, we're canceling the trip we had, we're canceling the plans we had, we're shifting how we're spending our time and our money because this is a special moment where we get to invest in this. And listen, for all of you who have served like this so radically, I just want you to know from the bottom of my heart, I see it all. I really do. For you who have been doing that, I want to make sure you know that as like your leader, like I do not walk around and be like, yeah, everyone's got this. I see all of the sacrifice. I see it in people who are there who I know just like me, they have kids. And it's like they're still coming in an evening, and I know that means mom's at home taking care of the kids all night while they're here. You're like, that's sacrifice. And I see people that I know are really, really hard workers. They show up already sweaty from a day of work. And they're like, well, what can I do for the next 3 hours? It's like, I already know you're tired, man. But you're here because you realize this is something that has legacy potential. You know, at work, it's great. You paid for your family's things, but a lot of us feel that in work. We're like, this isn't legacy. This is just temporary. Listen, this is a moment that we have to be able to invest ourselves into something that lasts beyond ourselves. Now, here's where we're at in this journey. We are 9 weeks away from our deadline. Let that sink in for a second. Gives me like nervous tension in my stomach every time I say it out loud, right? And we have lots to do. In fact, it reminds me, a ways into this journey, they had the same thing happen in Nehemiah. They started out, they're kicking butt, taking names. And then This conversation happens in Nehemiah 4. And I just want to read you a couple of verses in this to show you what kind of took place, because we see where it happens in Nehemiah 4:6. It says, "At last the wall was completed to half its height around the entire city, for the people had worked with enthusiasm," right? Like, we're halfway there, man. We got the wall half built. And you think that would be exciting, but what's interesting is this is what actually happens at this moment where they're like, we're getting there. It says this in verse 10. "Some of the people of Judah began to complain, 'The workers are getting tired and there is so much rubble to be moved. We will never be able to build the wall by ourselves.'" You know, it's interesting because they're halfway done and you think they would get more excited, but actually at halfway done, they look at it and they're like, "We can't do this. We can't do this. We're not going to make it." You know, it's interesting when we did Hope Week. After Hope Week, I had a bunch of people who were like, "This is amazing, Cameron. We're definitely going to make it." And I'm like, "That's because you've been here one day." Yeah, one day seemed great. The reality is what I noticed is this kind of this interesting thing. Sometimes faithfulness is actually just foolishness. I'm not trying to be mean, but it's like when we don't know about something, it's really easy to have a lot of faith. And people are like, "Oh, we're definitely going to do it, Cameron." You're like, "You ever pull wire and frame a building?" You're like, "No." You're like, "That's why I'm stressed and you're not." "We're definitely going to make it, Cameron." And you're like, "Have you been here the last 3 weeks and seen how long it takes to get this stuff done?" Because these people aren't slacking. They're all working really hard, and it is really difficult to make movement. And see, they got halfway through, and they looked at it, and they felt their arms and their legs growing tired, and they're like, "We can't do this. We can't do this. We're not going to make it on our own." It says this in verse 12. "The Jews who lived near the enemy, they came and they told us again, 'They will come from all directions and attack us.'" He says, "Did you guys know, this is actually dangerous? There are people who don't like what you're doing. There are people who are against us who don't like what they're doing, and they are planning to come and attack us." He says, "So I placed armed guards behind the lowest parts of the wall in the exposed areas, and I stationed the people to stand guard by the families, armed with swords and spears and bows. They said, 'Bad things are going to happen.' This is too much, Nehemiah. It's too much. I think that this is going to collapse in on itself. People are fighting against us. The enemy is obviously coming against us. We're not going to make it." And I love in verse 14, this is what Nehemiah did. He prays, I'm sure, because we see Nehemiah as always this man who's praying. And it says in verse 14, "I looked over the situation and I called together the nobles and the rest of the people, and I said to them this: 'Don't be afraid of the enemy. Remember the Lord who is great and glorious, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes.'" It's amazing because he doesn't give this long, drawn-out speech. He brings them back together and he makes 3 statements. He says, first of all, don't be afraid of the enemy. You know, it's interesting because they were all terrified of the enemy. They all thought bad things were going to happen to them. The enemy never ended up attacking. Isn't that just so true for so many of us? We spend so much time in anxiety over things that are never actually going to happen. Worry, 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 stress, 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 and God's like, it's not even going to happen. Why are you wasting so much energy thinking about what could be? If they attack, he says, "I got guards. We'll deal with it when it happens, but stop putting all of your focus on the bad things that could happen. Stop having all of your energy on this bad stuff could come into our life." He says, you're wasting your attention. And then he says this: "Remember your God. Remember the Lord. He is great and glorious." He's like, did you guys forget that we've been in exile for 70 years and God made a miraculous way that we were able to come back to this? You think this is too hard? You think this is too impossible? We were just slaves in a foreign nation, and here we are building on our own land. And he says this: fight. But it's interesting because he doesn't say fight for yourself or anything like that. He says this: fight for your brothers. Fight for your daughters and your sons. Fight for your wives, and fight for your very own homes. He says basically, fight for your legacy. Fight for your legacy. You have people you love around you. You have a community around you, and I want to inspire you today. Fight to make sure that your life blesses their lives. And friends, as I look over our situation, listen, I have the exact same feeling. Many of us, we look around and we're like, man, this could happen, and this could happen, or this might happen. And maybe even as we talk about serving radically or giving generously, people are like, yeah, but what if this happens to my finances? Or what if this happens to my work schedule? This happens. And I would just say, wait a second, why are we putting so much energy on the could-be's of what the devil could bring into you? I'm literally doing a series, When the Devil Attacks. We can be prepared for him. I just don't see how we can get it done. And listen to me, if there is anyone in this church who has had that run through their mind, it's me 1,000 times more than all of you. It's me walking through that place and hearing that voice. We can't do this. It's impossible. And he says, but, who is the God that you are doing this for? If you look at just the walls, if you look at just the work, if you look at just where the church is going, it seems impossible. But who is the God that you serve? I'm reminded, listen to me again, just like them, it's impossible we're even in the building. The building was always a no. It was never a possibility. There were no answers, and a building that was not for sale was sold to us behind the scenes because of God doing miracle work in someone's heart. It was always a no. And yet God did miracles. So the fact we're even here is a miracle. So why couldn't God do miracle again? And of course, in this moment where so many are saying, yeah, but it's a lot left and I'm tired. I feel the same thing. Would you fight for your legacy though? This year, what do you want your life to be about? This year as you finish 2023, do you want it to just be another average year? Is it a year where it's like, no, that was one of the ones where I invested myself into something that outblessed myself. Something that continues to live on beyond me. Here's what I would think Nehemiah was saying in this, and I would say to us as a church at the exact same time. Nehemiah looks at these men and he says, listen, right now your heart is set on a probability for difficulty. And he says, and it's real. The probability for difficulty ahead, very, very realistic. But listen, he says, I want you to shift your eyes on the possibility for legacy. You've had in your mind all the probability, right, of all these issues coming, the probability for difficulty. But he says, what if you instead put your eyes on the possibility for legacy? You look and say, this is hard, this is difficult, this would take a sacrifice. And he says, and that's exactly where legacy comes from. If we make this happen, it blesses our entire community. Your sons, your daughters, your families, your houses have a house to sit in and are protected. Friends, we're 9 weeks away from our deadline, and this is this moment we have to decide for ourselves. Would we fight to be able to sacrifice and serve so we could leave this legacy, so we could finish this and say, we're not going to miss this deadline. We're going to make it, and we're going to keep serving and growing. This is the time like never before to build his church. I told you today as well, one of our big focuses for this weekend was our money, our budget. A little over a month ago, we totaled up all the bills we had left to pay, and I told you we had $185,000 to spend, and we found out we have $275,000 worth of bills. That's a bad day. If you're wondering, as like for me, if you pray for me, that was a really bad day, okay? As I total up all the different contractors and expenses, and I was like, wait a second, math doesn't add up here. And as I was thinking about the story of Nehemiah, I was like, did I miss that part in Nehemiah? Where was the money talk in Nehemiah, right? But you know what's funny, as I read on and I realized I did miss it because it actually happened afterwards. It says that after the walls were built, Nehemiah says he takes a census of everyone who is there. But as I read it, for some weird reason, I don't even know why, the census caught my eyes about the numbers that were in it. And I went, wait a second, I just read this. Because right before Nehemiah is the book of Ezra. And if you know this story, it's interesting. They were in Babylonian captivity, and there's actually 3 waves of people coming back to Israel. The first was Zerubbabel, which if you've got a boy in your belly, that's a great name, right? No one's going to copy that name, Zerubbabel. He ends up bringing people back, and what he just starts is just the altar where they actually make sacrifices. We have nothing else there, but we're going to start making the sacrifices to the Lord. And then a few years later, this guy Ezra comes back and he says, instead of just doing the sacrifices, we're going to begin to build the temple around it. And then a few years later, Nehemiah comes back and says, it's not enough to just have the temple. We actually need the walls to house this so that we actually have a home. And what I realized was this story that he was telling of everyone who was there wasn't everybody after he had finished the project. It was the story of the last 5 or 6 years of people coming, day after day, year after year, and joining this move of God that was happening in this area, of coming back and jumping in with what they were doing. And listen, it's amazing because this is the story of years of people showing up, and listen what they say happens as they show up. Nehemiah 7, 66 through 72. It says a total of 42,360 people returned to Judah, in addition to 7,337 students and 245 singers. I didn't know singers got such a special place in the count. Guys who are up on stage, congrats. Both men and women. They took with them 736 horses, 245 mules, 69,435 camels, and 6,720 donkeys. A lot of people came back over this time. But it says this in verse 70, some of the family leaders gave gifts for the work. When they showed back up at this move of God, they were inspired to generosity. It says the governor gave to the treasury 1,000 gold coins, 50 gold basins, 530 robes for the priests. The other leaders gave to the treasury a total of 20,000 gold coins and some 2,750 pounds of silver for the work, and the rest of the people gave 20,000 gold coins, about 2,500 pounds of silver, and 67 robes to the priests. You see, as they came over the course of these years and saw where God was moving, they invested in it because they said, this is bigger than us. And you know what I love about it? Is that it's so grassroots. It's not just one benefactor. I love the way they explain it. Right at the beginning, they're like, yeah, there was a really rich guy. He was a governor. He gave a lot of money. But then they said a bunch of the leaders who are like the prominent business leaders in the community, says they all gave as they were showing up. And it turns out they gave just as much or more than that one rich man. And then it says that then just the average people who are coming back, they all gave as they showed up. And it's cool because they gave just as much as all of those prominent people did as well. All those people who might seem rich, like they have it all together. Just the grassroots supplied those needs. In fact, in Ezra it says this, each gave as much as they could. I love that. It reminds me of a time that Paul asked the church in the New Testament about giving to serve the bigger picture church. Jerusalem needed help at this time. They weren't functioning well, and he says, we need to supply their needs. And he says in 2 Corinthians 9, 7 through 8, you must each decide in your heart how much to give. And don't give reluctantly or in response to pressure. God loves a person who gives cheerfully, and God will generously provide all you need, and then you will always have everything you need and plenty left over to share with others. I love it. It's like he says, God or me, I'm not going to tell you how much to give. He says the whole point is that you would pray and you would ask God, what is it that I could contribute? And I love, he says, there's two wrong ways you can do this. One is you could give reluctantly, which means you're operating all out of this fear. Well, what about? Well, what if? And he's like, that's reluctant giving, where it's all generated by fear. I need you to not step into that. But at the same time, he says, man, don't give out of pressure. Like, don't hear someone else is giving something and being like, yeah, I got to do that to keep up with them. He's like, that's not it. He says, the idea for you is to pray and for you just to give generously what you know you can give. And he says, here's what I know. God will then supply you with more so you can keep being generous. That's actually one of the markers of Christianity. I need you to get this. Generosity is a marker of Christianity because we actually believe that as we are generous, God will give us more so that we can be generous again. And if we stay away from that, what we're doing is we're stopping that flywheel of blessing we actually believe God does in our life. And listen, the reason why people would do this is they were showing up with Nehemiah. The reason why people would give in a season at the beginning of the new church as it was forming, the reason why people would give in a moment like this isn't out of this like demand from God. The reason why people would move money that they had in a fund for vacation, for a car, for upgrades to the house, for savings, for new stuff, for retirement, whatever it might be, because all of your money already probably has a purpose. But the reason why that would be moved is because it has a greater calling. Jesus looks at his disciples in Matthew 6, 19 through 21, and he says this is amazing. Don't store up treasures here on earth, where moths eat them and rust destroys them. Where thieves break in and steal them. Another translation of that would be where the government inflates the economy and then taxes you and takes it all away. It's the same thing. Store your treasures in heaven, where moths and rust cannot destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be. It's interesting because when Jesus talks about transitioning what you use your finance from just the here and now into the idea of legacy, that's the whole point, is he said the reason why you would change how you spend your finances, why you would give to things that are about God's move on this earth and eternal things, is because it's a better investment. It lasts longer. I don't know about you, but I think that sometimes, is it just me, or does it take way too much work to make the amount of money you're making? Anybody else? And you think, man, I work way too hard for how much I end up getting at the end of this month. And he says, right, and the problem is for a bunch of you, for a bunch of us, me included, we can spend all of our money just on things here and now. When we get to heaven, you're like, I didn't build anything that lasted. And he's like, see, when you get this mindset, you start thinking, wait a second, if I'm going to work this hard, I want my finances to go into something that's actually going to last. I don't just want it all to be taken away, burnt away, rot away, rust away, stolen away. I want something that outlives me. We had somebody just recently who was just moving away from this community, and they're giving generously to this campaign. And when we were talking about it, we came to this reality. It's interesting because you're leaving a community and you think, well, what do I do? And they decide to give generously because the reality is when they come back to this area, they know they left something behind for legacy. Oh, I might not be there, but I invested something there that I know is going to outlast me. You see, God, the reason why he would call us to this isn't because he needs our money. It's so that we can actually utilize what we have and we can build legacy with our time, with our energy, with our money. Your finances can actually build the church. Your time can actually build the church. Your energy can actually build his church. And it's the one thing that's going to last. And I love this, actually, kind of a bonus that maybe we don't even understand yet, is Jesus actually says, this is really cool too. If you do this, it'll actually move the desires of your heart. Listen to me, sometimes when people will quote that verse where they're like, God wants a generous giver, like a cheerful giver. So you're like, so if I don't feel cheerful, I shouldn't give, right? And I would look at this one and I would say, what's interesting is Jesus actually said, when you give, it moves the desires of your heart. And here's what I wonder. Some of us are like, well, if I don't feel cheerful, I shouldn't give. And I wonder if Jesus would be like, try giving and see if you don't start falling in love with building legacy. And all of a sudden that cheer might come. I'll tell you for sure, for my mom, she taught me obedience comes first, joy comes second. Oh, you'll be cheerful. But the first step is just going, I'm just going to trust God that when he says this will move my heart, it will. And I remember just starting to give, and I remember it happening, where I was like, this is my favorite thing to pay for every month. This is my favorite thing to give to every month. Worship team, come up here. Get ready to help me close this. Friends, what are you going to build in 2023? Will this be a year marked by building temporary things? There's certainly nothing wrong with building temporary things. I need you to get this, okay? There's nothing sinful with building temporary things. You need to take care of your family. You need to take care of your house. You need to take care of those things. There's nothing sinful about that. But in 2023, is all you're going to do is invest your time, your money, and energy into stuff that's going to rust and rot, stolen away, disappear? Or are you going to build something that actually lasts? The secret, like I told you, to building something that lasts is finding where Jesus is moving, where God is moving, and joining it. And listen to me. Jesus is moving in this church. Jesus is moving through this church. Really quick for me, okay? Do you mind a quick little participation? Could you do me a favor? If you started coming to Acts Church this year, would you raise your hand real quick for me? Look around. Is that not insane, friends? Is that not insane, friends? Just this year, we have people who are like, this is the spot God's called me to. Listen, just this year, we had a weekend where we had 107 kids in our Acts Kids program. 107 kids coming and hearing about Jesus. A few weeks ago, we baptized 37 people on one weekend. People who say, I want to go public about my faith. And listen, just this year alone, we've had 70 people in our services raise hands and say, I want to take my first step towards Jesus this year. Listen, God is moving and he is building here. He's building his church, and this is my call to you. I don't want you to watch it. I want you to be a part of it. I want you to be part of the legacy work that Jesus is doing in this church. The reason why he's doing it is, listen to me, he wants to change the Illinois Valley from the inside out. And us as a church are devoted to figuring out how we can do that with everything we have. Our goal is not to just maintain and hold upright, and we're going to keep this little measure of faith to ourselves. Listen to us. Our goal is to saturate the Illinois Valley with Christians who truly do love Jesus, who are irreligious and are just ecstatic about the faith they have, and it's contagious across our communities. Where people go like, wow, I didn't even know Christians could be like that. I didn't even know Jesus followers talked like that. That's what we want in our area. I want 2023 to be a year where you look back and you said, I did something that lasted. Listen, for us who are serving, you have been serving so hard, and for some of you in this next 9 weeks who are like, I'm shifting my schedule, I'm gonna be there to help make this happen. Listen, you're not serving sacrificially so that we can have a building. You're serving because you say, this is legacy. This is something that's going to outlast me. This is something that's going to outbless me. This is something that's going to bless the next generation. This is something that's going to keep serving this community. For you who are giving today, who have been giving this month and saying, man, I want to sow into this with my finances. Listen to me, you're not buying a church building. You're taking and you're funding legacy work. You're saying, if there's one thing I can put some of my energy, my hard-earned cash into, it's so that we can continue to have this anchor in our community. No matter how dark it gets, there's a place that says, here is light. Here is light, LaSalle, Peru. Here is light, Illinois Valley, to come and find it. That the next generation has better tools than we do to be able to continue and do ministry. Listen, 10 years ago when we planted this church, this is what we had. We had 15 people. And we got together and we said, we think that if we planted a church, there are a bunch of people who need it. And a bunch of people sacrificed almost everything they had, all the finances they had, all the time they had, and they said, let's build a church. But the reason why they did it is because it wasn't about building a church service for themselves, it was about leaving a legacy. We believe it could outbless us. If we put in this amount of work, it could bless the next people who are coming. It could bless our kids when they show up. And friends, we're at the same season again, where I would invite you in your time, your energy, and your finances to say, listen, I want to invest in this because I want to invest in legacy. This church has served me. I want to make sure it's here to serve others. I want to make sure there's another seat for someone else to come in. I want to make sure there's more space for those children. I don't want services where there's too many kids for the space we have. I want to make sure there's room so we can continue to serve and go and bless this area with the presence of Jesus Christ. At the end of this year, I'm wholeheartedly believing, against my good nature, that we are going to go into that building and we are going to praise Jesus in it once more. And here's my hope for you. I want you to be able to walk in there that day and go, I helped build his church. I'm not just watching this, I'm part of this. That when you bring your family there, when you bring your kids there, when you bring your friends there, and listen, some of your friends, your family, your kids, that's the place they're going to meet Jesus. You look around and you say, I helped build this. Jesus invited me to be a part of this, and don't I feel blessed that I got to be a part of building something that actually lasts. Here's what I'd love to ask you to do. Worship team, you guys come out here. The worship team is going to play a song for us, and it's going to be our anthem for the next 9 weeks. In a season where it might seem impossible, this is going to be our anthem to carry us through it, to keep us encouraged, to keep us going. And I would invite you to sing and to believe and to grow in faith in this song. But also I would invite you right now as we're singing this song, this is your opportunity if you want to give as well. Some of you have already given online. You've already sent checks. I appreciate you so much. You're the forward thinkers. You're like, I'm just going to go for it right now. But for some of you, today is like, no, I brought a check with me. I brought cash with me. I brought something and I want to give. And this is an opportunity during this song, if you want to, just to go back to our giving area, pray, and give your gift and say, God, would you build something that lasts with this? If you want to, you can give online during this. You can give on our website, buildhischurch.com, and you could shop during this. Whatever it is, whatever your response is. And of course, that you would just sing and you would celebrate what God's been doing and the opportunity for you, for us to all be a part of this. Let's go ahead and sing together. Stand up.